cloud. There we go. Okay. So good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Carolyn Samuel. I'm the Associate Director for Faculty and Teaching Development at Teaching and Learning Services, and I'm here with my colleague, Eva. Eva, would you like to introduce
Hi, good morning,
yourself?
everybody.
So we are going to be talking today about another feedback strategy. So it's a third one in our series. The series is called Feedback Strategies Engaging Students in Dialogue. And part 3 today is collaborating on assessment criteria. Now, don't worry if you missed the first 2 webinars in the series because they have been recorded. And actually, I'm just going to copy the links. And I will put these in the chat for you now in case you missed the links are really long. They're not pretty. There we go. In case you missed the other webinars and would like to go back to them, you've got the links there. All right, so to set the scene, Ava, let's go to the next slide. And we'll just set the context here. So we are talking about feedback strategies that pertain largely to writing assignments. That said, one could apply them to other assignment types as well. But really, what we want to talk about is, this scenario where you are faced with just piles of papers and you need to give feedback to the students. And we wanted to talk about strategies for situations like this where you might feel overwhelmed by all the work that needs to be done. And the approach that we're talking about is one that involves students in dialogue regarding feedback. And the idea is to make this a much more productive and manageable process for you. So manageable for you, but productive for both you and the students, of course. We have 2 outcomes for this webinar series. They're the same ones for all 4 webinars in the series. We hope that by the end, you'll be aware of an expanded conception of the feed in feedback and also be able to implement feedback strategies that are appropriate for your students' learning context that engage these students in dialogue. So those are the 2 outcomes. And we also think it's important now, of course, to remind everybody and to help you understand today's strategy, what the foundational notions are that underpin this webinar series. And namely, it's that feedback can be a 2-way street. So that's the dialogue piece, right? And the dialogue can be really meaningful. So as researchers Hattie and Timperley and Sadler have conceived of this, that they describe dialogue, this dialogue approach to feedback in 3 ways. So each of these 3 ways, so we've got the 3 on the screen, the feed up, feedback, and feed forward. Each of them has been associated with a question, and it's a question that students might ask themselves or you might ask students to address. So for those of you who joined us at previous webinars, we're going to give you a minute to think what those 3 questions are so you can test yourselves. We're not asking you to call it out. We're not asking you to type anything in the chat. Don't worry about that. But just for yourselves, have those questions in mind. Can you recall what those questions are? If you're joining us for the first time, we're going to give you the first question. So Ava, if you want to hit the click button. Okay, so the first question is, where am I going? So students might be wondering, they should be wondering, what's the target? What are the expectations for the assignment? What should I be doing? And we conceive of that as feed up. So feed up is what students need to know in order to produce the assignment in a successful way. In other words, meeting the criteria. Okay, so for the rest of you, you've had a chance to think, and now we're going to show you the questions. Okay, so the 2 other questions are how am I doing and where to next? So with how am I doing, students are thinking about what the gap is between the target, what they're aiming for, and the work that they actually handed in. So there's a gap there, and that's the feedback. And the third question is where to next? And with that, students are thinking about what they need to do to improve the quality of their work and produce work that actually meets your expectations. So that's feed forward. Where to next? What do I need to do to improve? That's the feed forward. So these three types of feed allow students to be engaged in their assignments in different ways throughout, like at different stages of the assignments as well. And let's keep going. So with a dialogue approach, students are more likely to understand how to improve their writing. They are more likely to be able to act on comments, meet expectations, and develop independence. And when we think about the developing independence part, it's because these strategies call on students to develop their metacognitive skills also. So they're not only producing the work, but they're thinking about how they are doing that as well. So the metacognitive piece is important for this, and that's how we develop students' learner independence. And we'd also like to mention that a dialogue approach can be considered an inclusive approach or an inclusive pedagogical approach, because by definition, of course, there's dialogue there, and that is more inclusive. It's a way to engage students differently. And it allows students also to bring a little bit more of themselves to their work, because we are asking them questions about their work, what they think about their work, how they conceive of their work, how they perceive what they're doing. And that's really at a very individual level. So that's another way it's inclusive. With respect to today's particular strategy, which is collaborating on assessment criteria, that can level the playing field. So if students come with different backgrounds to their work, this is a way to ensure that all students have a shared understanding of what they need to do and an equal chance to succeed. Okay.
Talking about today's strategy, Carolyn, where does it fit into the 3 feeds?
Okay. So before I tell you which feed is most prominent today, I'd like to share a scenario, and then we'll get to the type of feed. So let's look at a scenario, Eva. Let's imagine this scenario. So you assign a paper to students. Students submit the paper, and you read the papers, and you are disappointed, you're even frustrated. And what does that look like, Eva? Yeah, that's exactly what it looks like. Okay, so you're reading these papers and you're frustrated, you're disappointed because students didn't do what you were hoping they would do. And then you provide students with feedback comments. The students receive the comments, they read them, and uh-oh, now we have the students who are disappointed and frustrated because they hadn't understood what you wanted. And that's a realistic scenario. I mean, that's certainly happened to me, that you plan an assignment with the best of intentions. You think the instructions are clear, and what you get back is not at all what you thought you were going to get back. Okay, so somebody's giving a thumbs up. That's validating. Thank you for that. Okay, so it's a realistic scenario, and to address this type of scenario, and to remove the frustration and the disappointment that you feel that the students feel, we want to put the students in a position where they understand the expectations. And instead of instructors providing a fixed set of criteria for writing assignments, we can invite our students to think about how the assignment should look beforehand. So ask them how it should be assessed before they do the assignment. And so this is a feed up strategy. So Eva, if you want to hit the click button there, and we get feed up. So today we're going to be talking about a feed up strategy. And how do you do this? Well, we're going to offer 2 examples today. There might be others, but we're going to limit it to 2 today. One is co-construction of assessment criteria, and the other one is student translation of assessment criteria. So let's go right away to the first one. So co-constructing criteria from scratch. So I've got some criteria on the screen here. They're fairly standard. We just went for something that is typical for writing assignments or research papers. You might give your students a list. It doesn't have to be a rubric. In this case, it's a checklist where it says thesis statement is clear and thesis statement responds to research question, evidence is provided, sources are cited. Okay, doesn't seem complicated, but you know what? That's really open to interpretation. What I think is clear might not be what students think is clear. A thesis statement responds to research question. Okay, that I feel more comfortable with, but evidence is provided. What I think is evidence might not be what students perceive as evidence. And sources cited, I might be thinking primary sources, and students might be thinking I'll cite Wikipedia, which could be okay in some cases, but maybe it's just not what I was expecting. So these criteria are open to interpretation. So let's see what we can do with this with our strategy. Let's go to the next slide. And this is one way to implement a strategy for co-constructing criteria. You can hand out assignment instructions to students at the beginning, could be instructions for a research paper, and ask the students to read the instructions. They do that individually. From there, working in small groups, students brainstorm characteristics of a quality research paper, and they can put them into categories which they label. And these categories become the criteria, the assessment criteria for the research paper. Then they get into groups to share their respective lists of criteria. They do that aloud, and the instructor can actually write those on the board, or students can write them on the board, and then guided by the instructor, students discuss the criteria on the board and then work toward reducing that list to a manageable number of assessment criteria for the assignment. And then the criteria can be divided among the groups, and students spend 10 minutes, let's say, developing descriptions of 2 extreme performance standards, like what would an excellent paper look like and what would a less excellent paper work like, or a poor paper, what would that look like, until they reach consensus within the group. And that might require some instructor intervention there, we don't know. And then at the end of the class, the students submit the final descriptions to the instructor, and the instructor can then combine everything, produce a final list for that assignment, and then can share it out with the students. Now, I do want to say, we don't always have to take what students say as is. If we're going to use what they submit, it's good to keep it in their own words. That's going to be helpful, and we'll talk more about that. Ava's going to talk about a strategy there. But we don't have to just accept everything as is. It can be more of a discussion, and the instructor can say, this will work, this will not work, this will work, this will not work, but still have a discussion around it and explain why you're going to land where you're going to land with the criteria. Of course, if you have no intention of using the students' suggestions, don't do the strategy. But all this to say that you don't have to take it wholesale. Like, what you get from students can be further refined so that you and students are on the same page. So I think that's pretty much it. There are lots of variations to how this can be implemented. We won't talk about all of those now, but just so you know, that's like a very basic way to do it, but one can take bits and pieces of it and tailor it to different course contexts. So Ava, how about you explain the next implementation?
Now you can hear me. I hope, yes, okay. So the second strategy is student translated criteria. And the assumption here is that you already have a rubric. Now, this could, of course, also be adapted to some other assessment tools, but basically the assumption is you have your criteria, you have your standards. And just to make sure that we're all talking the same language, I want to define this first. So criteria in the context of a rubric are the dimensions that we're using to measure how well a student has done on the assignment. And the performance standards, so let me see, we actually, I think, yeah, so these are the criteria. And the performance standards state the level of performance at which we're expecting students' work to be for a given criteria. Now, those of you who have been to our specific criteria writing workshop might look at these criteria and be like, well, couldn't this be done better? Yes, but this is not the focus of today's webinar. We will focus today on the performance standards, on the descriptions of the performance standards. I'm sorry, I'm being very distracted by a very loud lawnmower. Does anyone else hear that? Okay.
I do not hear a lawnmower, no.
Okay, thank you. I can hardly hear myself. Okay. The problem with these performance standards is the way they are written right now, and let's go here because I think this is a little bit easier to focus on. If you're just focusing on these performance standards up here for organization, let's give you a moment to read those. Okay, they give a lot of room for interpretation. So one way of dealing with this might to give students some time and say, try and write this in your own language. And here is an example of what it looks like. An instructor has already done this with class, and this is the result that he got. So this is how the students interpreted it, how they translated it into their own. Okay, so since you've had the pleasure to just listen to us so far, I want to give you a moment and try to do this yourself. So in the chat, go to the content, focus on the description of the performance standards for content, and see how you would translate that into simpler language. Just take a minute.
So it's like trying to imagine we're students now, right?
Yes, exactly. And you can just focus on part of it, not necessarily the whole thing. Any attempts?
Would we like people to put sentences in the chat? Would that be helpful?
Yes.
It's hard to do because we think so much like instructors.
Okay. In the interest of time. Oh, Margot, yes. Donetta, now they're coming. Excellent. Make sure your ideas are supported by reliable sources and that they point to the main argument. Excellent. I have to have evidence from at least 2 different perspectives and either privilege one perspective or point out what's missing. Okay. Okay. Let's reveal one other possibility. Again, there is no right or wrong answer to this. Okay, the question is, how will I get to this? Now, first, you have to prepare for this. What do you need if you want to have your students translate your rubrics? Well, one thing is you have to provide students with assignment instructions. So you already have to have a clear assignment, you have to have clear instructions, you have to have a detailed rubric for this. So this is where the strategy differs from the previous one. You also should have a blank rubric template and examples of student writing, and they should be anonymous. So where do you get student writing? You can either request examples of student writing from former students. You can look for it on the internet, or you can create something yourself for the purpose of this particular exercise. As far as the assignment instructions and the rubric are concerned, you can hand them out during class time, or you can make them available on my courses. The procedure starts by having each student individually look at the rubric and attempt to translate or rewrite all or selected portions of the performance standards that are identified in the detailed rubric. And as a next step, they get together in pairs and they discuss. So they explain their translations to each other and then together decide on a single final version of each of their translations. and use their translated rubric to then evaluate an example of student writing. Okay. And and then they also have to note any questions they're having as they're doing this. Very importantly, there has to be a final discussion with the class to make sure there is a common understanding. So this can be done either in person, or you could have the pairs submit their translations on my courses on the discussion board, and then the discussion could take place there, and TAs could respond to student questions there. The important thing is that students' questions that came up during the discussion are being addressed. Now, this can take up a lot of your class time. Why would you want to do this? Well, first of all, we have talked a lot in this series about clarifying assignment expectations, right? It's very important that students really understand what we want from them. Otherwise, if they don't know where to go, they have to guess. And that's exactly not what we want, because we want them to reach our learning outcomes. We don't want them to become mind readers. And the other reason is that we want to clarify the language that describes the criteria, because the language that we're using is often opaque to students. It's even often opaque to our colleagues, right? So it's very, and there's one thing about explaining it. There's a different feel to it when students can work up their way themselves and try to figure it out, rather than just listen to your explanations. So it empowers students when they're involved in these translations. It empowers them when they're involved in co-creating assessment criteria. It gives them a stake in their work. It gives them a better understanding of the assessment they will receive in the end. It will give them a better understanding of the grade and of the feedback they're getting. It gives them autonomy. And very importantly, it levels the playing field, because it makes sure that all students, regardless of their starting point, come to the same understanding in the end. So it's a very inclusive practice. Okay, Carolyn, did you want to add something to that?
What I'd like to add is that I realized I put an incorrect link in the chat, and I'm about to correct it. But in terms of what you've described, no, you've captured it well. We do have a comment in the chat, and I asked students if they wish to consent. So they sign a form that is co-signed by me. Maybe we can hear more about that. Eva, when you're ready, we can stop the recording and then have a few minutes for questions.
Let's go to
maybe learn more.
Sounds good.
Shall I stop the recording now?
Yes, please.
Okay.